Hello, I'm Will Smith. Welcome to the last segment of Citizens Forum. We're recording this show. Today is Wednesday, February 27th, 2019. And in this segment, we're going to be looking at consciousness again. My guest, Don Morris, has been interested in the change in consciousness around death that we're experiencing during our lifetimes here today. So welcome to the show, Don.
Good to be here. Thank you for the invite.
So how long have you been interested in this topic?
Well, my interest goes back a good 40 years, to be honest with you. Yeah, goes back. Well, my whole path, my life path was disrupted in 1957 when my father suddenly died, and things were not grieved well, we'll say. And as I got through my teens and went to college, I knew I had a lot of personal work to do. And I knew that I had to grieve deeply. I had to come to grips with this. And so I made it my mission to heal and to keep the focus on death and dying issues and do whatever I could to make it better for others.
I know this has been a big sort of a difficulty in my own family. We had a hard time talking about death. And I remember my grandfather couldn't even bring the subject up. You just couldn't talk to him about it. And I think that in general, now that I'm in my 60s, I see that that's just the way it is in our culture, really. So next weekend, I'm going to be taking a course with Don about home funerals and the vigil. So do you want to talk about that a little bit? What that's about?
Well, my training is for people who see that it's really important at this point in time for themselves and their families and even the community to bring more consciousness, to bring more love to death and dying issues than fear. And even if you bring 1% more, you're in a good space. Yeah. Because with that extra bit of consciousness, our hearts and minds open to what is, but it's that extra bit of love that keeps us real and keeps us connected to ourselves. And it's not easy. It's a difficult subject. It's a sensitive subject. It's an important subject. But bringing consciousness to it is like shining light on a very important part of our life that's uncomfortable. But I believe shining light on death, opening our minds with that extra bit of love pays tremendous dividends in living, because we get to be much more present, because I believe the unconscious mind pushes it away, the topic, for our own survival.
Yes. Well, I think you're right, we have such a fear in our society. We seem to have our whole way of governing people seems to be make them afraid of things, and I think that's the basic fear that all of us have, is that fear of death. And if that can be, I know that we're all going through. I've seen it in so many different guests, that fear of death is at the basis of everything. So defusing that can be with an addition of love. And I know that if you are around your family when somebody who is dear to you passes by, that's a huge part of grieving, right?
Well, it's precious to be with a friend or family when they take their last breath. And if you stay there at the bedside for an hour, you just can't help but feel and sense the sacredness of that setting with the deceased. Some people say that when we die, the veil between the worlds opens for the spirit to fly. And when a child is born, the veil opens and the child comes into the world. So it's a sacred place to be. And I advocate for spending more time at the bedside of someone after they've died with family and friends to reap the benefits. Now, it's kind of complicated because we all know the discomfort of being around a dead person. There's I read today, there's this generative tension. We're uncomfortable. We know that the body is decomposing. We also identify. In other words, you cannot deny that one day I too will be lying in a bed or in a casket, or that I'll die. And then there's the other side to it. And that's being in the silence that you just can't help but enter. That slows us down, that slows the mind down. And so, as I said, I advocate for families to have more time with their deceased and with family and friends. A throwback to a time when we lived on farms, or say First Nations lived in communities, and someone would die, and you didn't have someone to just come along and to relieve you of the burden of caring for a deceased person within an hour or two. It was natural, and we adjusted to it.
So how long is a vigil, a typical home vigil?
Well,
is that a good question or not?
Yeah, it's a great question. It's a great question. You know, generally when someone dies, it's not unusual for them to call the funeral director after a short while. It's good to spend the first hour in stillness, because it's a very sacred time after the passing. And it's generally families will wait a number of hours, say, until other family members can come. But a home vigil is an organized event where people are working out a plan that they had, that they created, to, say, sponge bathe the deceased, possibly change their clothing, possibly, if need be, put on like a depends, and to have a sacred space for a number of hours, and even an overnight, for friends and family to come, and maybe even two. The beauty of the home vigil is time. Mm-hmm. Time to accept the change. Time to share what's on your heart and mind with the deceased. Time to be supported by friends. And when you plan for this, you want to let go of the deceased when you're ready to let go. So the power shifts to us. We step into our power, so to speak. We become empowered. And this trend is, what's the word, nascent? You know, it's young. It's young, but people are recognizing that this is a very human thing to do. It's a very natural thing to do. And there are healing benefits. And again, it's a throwback to earlier times.
Right, oh, I totally understand that. Can you address some of the legal questions? Because this is legal to do this in BC.
In BC is a very good province for respecting citizens' right to grieve and to choose how they're going to grieve, and even to take charge of funeral arrangements themselves, and only contract a funeral director when it's absolutely necessary or they want to. Mm-hmm. Now, I'm saying that 99.5% of people will contract a funeral director, but this province and the hospital system, specifically Royal Jubilee, is friendly. And they support us. In other words, if you went to Royal Jubilee's hospice website, you would find a page, and it would give you all the directions how to manage a funeral by yourself if you didn't choose to work with a funeral director.
So are there forms to fill out and things? Is there
Well,
anything to do
certainly.
before, or just to familiarize
Well,
yourself?
beforehand, if it's your intention, if you're wanting to transport the deceased, say to the cemetery in a private vehicle, say to a crematory, you can get a private transport permit through Consumer Protection BC in advance. You can do that. And if you want to, you can meet with the doctor to have the doctor, to have her, to have him, or to have the coroner sign the medical certificate of death. And then you fill out a registration of death form, you put the two together, you fax them over to the government, and you'll get a permit for burial or permit for cremation.
So you can get this sort of in line before, but then once the event happens, then you're pretty
well,
much
it's
ready.
very important to have a death plan. You know, if you're going
Right.
to do this, you need a group of people to support you. I mean, this is challenging, especially when you're in anticipatory grief. The person
Yes.
is dying, and then we all know how difficult it is after someone dies. We go into somewhat of a altered state.
Right.
So it's important to know the laws, to get the training. I provide this training across Canada so that when the death occurs, you have another option, and an option that's not offered by funeral directors because they're too busy doing other things and running
Sure.
their business. But some young funeral directors, especially women that I know around Canada, they're starting to offer this because it's humane and it has a lot of healing potential.
Is there more acceptance of this? I mean, can you contrast this? If you're traveling all across Canada, can you make a general statement about where we're going with this?
Well, I would say people are interested. I think everyone's interested in death and dying, and another option, and a non-commercial option, because if you're able to do it all, so to speak, or by yourself, you're going to save a considerable amount of money, or work with a funeral director and have them do piecemeal portions. So everyone's interested in this. It's very human issue, and don't we all want to be empowered? And don't we all want to leave a good legacy? And don't we all want to set a good example for our children so they'll be less neurotic about living and less frightened of death? But it all comes back to that 51%, I call it, bringing more consciousness. I know this is your thing. And love to the struggle of living with death, the struggle of dying, and love's the way. Consciousness is the way. There's no other way, I think, to really maximize the experience of life outside of having a healthy relationship with death and bringing more love to a topic that we all want to push away.
Well, that's very interesting. I really think that you're in a good place, and you're in a good place to both teach it and watch what's happening. So thank you very much for being on the show. I really appreciate it.
Well, thank you. I wouldn't be here without your interest and without your love and consciousness.
Well, I look forward to taking the course this
Oh,
weekend.
great. Yeah, I look forward to seeing you.
So thanks for watching this segment of Citizens Forum.